What this teaching is all about. For those of you who were not, maybe this is completely new, and you're saying, what kind of a name is that? One God, one faith, three roads. Sounds kind of interesting, but maybe very ecumenical or even universalist. Some of you who are theologians, you may say, wait a minute, Rabbi, where are you going with that? Well, obviously, we're talking about one God because there's only one God. And when we talk about one faith, if there's only one God, there can only be one faith. I know people would like to have their own personal, private religions that they like to create, but that is not our way. We've had the privilege of relationship with this God from the days of Abraham, and we'd like to stick with that. So if other people want to create alternate versions, that's their business, but not something for us. And then three roads, what is that all about? Well, that is a little bit different. The truth is, it has to do with different paths, different roads that we take in life. When I say three roads or three paths, I do not mean as in three roads towards God. It's three roads with God. Once you already have God in your life, how now you walk with Him makes a difference. And there are different ways of walking with God. Some of you may be surprised, and some of you may say, okay, that makes sense. There's more than one way of walking with God. Who says that this way is better than that way, or that way is better than that way? And I wanted to explore with you, actually, in this study, three personalities, three different people that I find in the scriptures that are very inspiring and very directive. How their lives unfolded and what they did with God and how they walked with God is very indicative to where they were with God. But nevertheless, God looked upon them with pleasure. And I think there are lessons to learn from us, from them, and say, if I want to please God with my walk, maybe I should walk one of these ways, because apparently one of those ways is acceptable to God, and another one is also acceptable, and another one is also acceptable, and they're all different. So at the expense of sort of say trying to make everyone fit into the same mold, that's what I'm proposing. I realize that as I began this teaching, I explained something to people. We talked about unity and diversity. That's one of the things that I talked about, unity and diversity. And we mentioned how unity is not the same thing as uniformity. Sometimes in this world, we are made to think that unity means uniformity or sameness. Men and women cannot be united unless the distinction between men and women is erased, right? That means, guys need to put on skirts and girls need to put on pants, and all of a sudden we're equal now, or something like that, or vice versa, or whatever. Or everyone wears pants, or everyone wears skirts, and then we're equal. And so this whole idea about equality, equal everything, the truth is we're not equal. We're different. Some of us are taller, some of us are shorter, some of us can jump higher, and some of us can't jump at all. Some of us can dance, and others can't. Some can sing, and others should not. We're not equal. We're not. That's okay. And it's okay to be different. It's okay to be who God made you, because He made you the way He made you, and He did not make a mistake, and that's all right to be who you are. But we live in a world where everyone needs to be equalized and made same. Well, that would be a very boring, robotic world. Excuse me. I mean, that's what it would be. It would be like this crazy sci-fi movie where everybody's a robot. We don't need that. We need the diversity that God created. And God created this world to be diverse for a reason. So what we're called to, however, is unity. Unity of this one God, one faith in diversity. As different as we are, we can find how to stand together and be united. And it doesn't mean being the same. It may mean doing some of the same things we do, but it also sometimes means doing them or achieving those goals in a slightly different way. Consistent with who we are, let's put it that way. That's what we mean. So that's what we talked about, unity, diversity, and hopefully you understand what I mean. I'm not talking about us and these roads, these paths we take in life to encounter God. There's only one way to encounter God. And we all do it the same way. I don't care who you are in the world. If you want to encounter the divine, you're going to have to do it in the same way. But once we have encountered God, it is how we walk this road of life is what makes us a lot of times who we are. And sometimes those roads have to do with who we are and who we came to be. So I wanted to look at the examples. Last time at the example specifically of Ruth and Naaman and Noah, if you haven't guessed. Those are my three people that I would like to focus on. But I left you last time with this verse, and we quote this as we take the Torah out of the ark. Ein kamocha v'elohim Adonai ve'ein kemasecha. There is none like you among the gods, O Lord, nor are there any works like yours. And then the rest, the part that we do not sing when we take the Torah out of the ark, it says, Kol goyim asher chatzita yavo ve'ishtachavu lefanecha Adonai ve'yichavdu l'shemecha kegadol ata v'yosei niflaot ata Elohim levadecha. All the nations that you have made, they shall come and they will worship you. They will worship before you. They shall glorify your name, for you are great, and you do wondrous things, and you alone are God. See, there is only one God, and there is only one faith, and there's only one eventual outcome of it all, and that is Israel and the nations worshiping together in this kind of way. And the prophets have foreseen this, and the psalmists have sang songs and wrote poems about this moment in history, and one day it will happen. Yes, it will take God's presence in our midst in order for that to become reality. I realize that. But until then, we'll have to do the best we can and wait for that moment of complete restoration and redemption. But that is the vision. That is what we're moving to. That's what I mean. One God, one faith, really. That is not a New Testament thing. That is not a Christian theological postulation. It is right there. It's in the prophets, it's in the Psalms. It's been the desire of Hashem all along to integrate all humanity together, worshiping Him. Because He's great. He's only one God. We can share. So that brings me to the path of Ruth. I debated whether I should start with Ruth or Naaman. Ruth or Naaman. And I decided I'm going to start with Ruth because that's a more familiar path. And then we'll go to Naaman. You may not know the story of Naaman the Aramean so much, but everyone knows the story of Ruth the Moabitess. And there's so much to her story. So if you bear with me, I'll go through some of it, but some of it I'm going to run through really fast. I'm really hoping that you know this story well, and so we may just hang on some portions of the story, but it's really about the big picture that I want you to see out of this. So what is the path of Ruth? When we're talking about people walking with God, practical application of how does one do that? She has a very distinct path. To remember just a little bit about Ruth. The book of Ruth really tells us a story of this Israelite family who moved to Moab from Beit Lechem. So Beit Lechem is this nice Jewish town. I know not right now, but back then. Nice Jewish town. And they move out of there, and they move to Moab. Beit Lechem, by the way, you know what it means. It means the house of bread. But the book of Ruth begins with the words that there was famine in the land. And the rabbis always comment saying that that wasn't the famine of food, it was the famine for God's Spirit. So they were searching for something they wasn't even sure what, perhaps. And so Naomi and her husband Elimelech and Machlon and Chilion, they move to Moab from Beit Lechem. What they're searching in Moab is hard for me to say because Moab is not one of those lands Israelites are supposed to move to. If you don't know the story, perhaps you remember all the things that have happened in the land of Moab. As Israel was going through Moab, it is the Moabites who called the false prophet Balaam to pronounce curses upon the Israelites. It is they who instigated one of the worst apostasies to compare to the golden calf perhaps alone, that has killed off a lot of Israelites. And so Moabites are not exactly the friendly people in Israelite vocabulary. So the two sons, they married local women, and they felt very settled. That's what the book of Ruth tells us. But suddenly, they and the father of the household died and left behind 3 widows. Now, those of you who can understand this progression, they move out from a place of God's blessing into the land of Moab, which is definitely not a place of God's blessing. That's where the curses were pronounced upon Israel, or meant to be pronounced. And all of a sudden, they start dropping dead. And the tradition says that they didn't just die that it was a slow decay, that basically the animals started dying first. That's what rabbis say. And then as their animals started dying, then people started dying. And finally, all the men in the family are gone, and the women are left, and the widows. And the widows decide what are they going to do, how are they going to go on. It's a different kind of a society, and actually women at that point needed men to function in a proper way. So it was very much a man's world. I mean, it's a patriarchal society. It's an ancient Near East, and so they were very vulnerable in a foreign country especially. So the book begins with this story of the parting of the widows as the mother-in-law encourages the daughters to return to their families. That is the story of Ruth. And so one daughter-in-law agrees to go back to her father's house, but the other refuses and wants to return to Israel with her mother-in-law. So there's already two paths that you can hopefully see. The two daughters-in-law do not make the same decision, even though they are presumably from the same area, from the same land. This is actually Moab. All they have to do is just go back to their parents' house. Tradition tells us that, their families were well-to-do families, actually. So it's not like they couldn't take care of them or anything like that. They had something to go back to. But one of the daughters decides not to go back. She says, I'm not going to do this. And this is where the path of Ruth towards God of Israel and with God of Israel becomes very clear to us, because she refuses to return home. She wants to go with Naomi. She wants to go live in Israel. She wants to stay with her mother-in-law, who is, by the way, absolutely destitute and broke. So this is the passage. Let's remember that. This is Ruth chapter 1, verses 14 through 18. And they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Then she said, Behold, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, Do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you. For where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. And your people shall be my people. And your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. And there I will be buried. And I'm skipping a little bit here. It says, when she saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. And if you know the story, you know that multiple times Naomi tried to shoo Ruth away, make her go away. Go back to your family. Go back to your gods. Return back. I have nothing to offer to you. Remember the whole conversation they had. Look, if I had another son, I could say, hang around. He will get older. He will marry you. Why? Because we actually have this thing in Israel, okay? It's called Kinsman Redeemer. We have this levirate marriage. And so in those days, there was a potential for someone who lost their husbands to have offspring and to have family of their own and have that statement, that position, that inheritance in the family. And that was a possibility, but Naomi says, I can't give you that. I don't have that. I'm broke. I don't have any more children, and I'm old, and I'm not well. What do I have to give you? And in light of all that, Ruth says these words. Notice what she says. This is very, very important to kind of see all the bits and pieces that Ruth offers. She says, where you go, I'll go. So she's definitely not leaving. She's going with her. Where you lodge, I will lodge. So wherever you sleep, that's where I'm going to sleep. Your people are going to be my people. Your God will be my God. And where you die, I will die. So she already realized that the grim reality of the fact that at some point they're going to die. And she's saying, I'm willing to follow you in life now, in whatever condition that there is. Wherever you're going to live, that's where I'm going to live. And if you die, well, I guess I'll just die with you. And that's it. That is a future, a possibility that she sees. And says, and where you're going to be buried, that's where I want to be buried. So even in my death, even in my burial, I don't want to leave. I want to be attached to you. And so this idea is that it says that Ruth clung to her. Clung. This clinging, okay? In Hebrew, this is the idea, this is davak, okay? Dvikut is a very particular kind of clinging. So the clinging of that sort, the attachment of that sort, begins on the very first pages of Torah, where it says that an Adam and Eve clung to each other, essentially, and they became one flesh. So this is the kind of a union we're talking about. She is that attached to her mother-in-law that she says, I am not letting go. It's amazing. We don't really know, the story doesn't tell us what it is that made her feel this way, what it is that brought her to this position, to this kind of thinking. But it's very clear that she's embracing Naomi and her people and her God and her destiny. Whatever Naomi's destiny will be, she's okay embracing that. And so after all the attempts to convince her otherwise, Naomi finally, she gives up. She says, I can't convince her, so I guess she is going to her with me. I'm not going to be able to get rid of that. So that's it. That's how the story proceeds. So hopefully you could see the beauty of this language, because for many people this verse has become something of their life verse. Some people feel that sort of an affinity for Israel, and as people read these pages in the Bible, they say, I feel like that too. And I understand that, but this is a very, very unique and special path that I want you to see. So what happens? The biblical text reveals that basically Ruth's decision was to cast her lot with Naomi, and by extension with her people Israel. And it's interesting that I think her decision was motivated by her belief in Naomi's God, because specifically she does not want to go to her people and her gods. She says, your God will be my God. And this is something we don't always understand. We don't always connect these dots. Because to us, peoplehood or nationality and God are kind of a separate things. We live in a world where these things are not the same. They're mixed up. There's diversity that exists with that, but not in Naomi's world, not in ancient Israel. So Ruth's proclamation of faith, her intent, her absolute loyalty are the key factors in this story. What I want you to realize is that the formal practice of conversion, which emerged later in Jewish society, way, way long after Ruth, it was based on these very key principles that are actually outlined in this book. The book of Ruth became essentially a model of how to deal with someone who wants to join the people of Israel. And Ruth's loyalty to Naomi and to her God was really not theological, what I want you to understand. Even though she is motivated by her faith in Israel's God, that is not all she's opting for. Notice, she's not saying, your God will be my God, but my people will be my people. She says, no, your people will be my people. Your land will be my land. Your lot will be my lot. Your death will be my death. I'm going to be buried where you're buried. Everything that you're going to experience in life, I'm in on that. It's not just I'm going to believe in your God. So this is not a mere theological alignment. I want you to see this is a life alignment. That's a very different paradigm, because people are used to the term conversion today. And when I say word conversion, many people think conversion that they know. Okay? And one of the largest religions in the world, Christianity, conversion is done by a theological statement. Do you believe? Yes. Okay, you're in. You see, this is different. What she believes is important, but the fact that she says, my loyalty is now 100% with you and your people and your land. She changes her citizenship. Not just her actual, belief system. She doesn't just abandon her gods. She actually abandons her people. And that is a whole different path. Her loyalty is now reoriented. This is much more tangible. This is not what converts in Christianity are being asked to do. They're not being asked, stop being an African. You cannot be an African Christian anymore. Koreans, no more. Russians, no, your loyalty is no longer to Russia. It's to the God of Israel, and therefore, i.e., to Israel. Nobody's being asked that. That's a theological belief. That's a theological conversion versus the kind of conversion that we see in the life of Ruth.
it's, here we are in 2024. It is so hard, I think, for us to put ourselves in that context, right? Because we have all these filters of thousands of years on our consciousness, and it's like to try to wipe that away and to see this clearly. It's like we're seeing through the filters of quote unquote religion.
And culture.
Right? And culture, etc.
Honestly.
When I read that passage on that previous page, Ruth doesn't say, your religion will be my religion.
Right.
Your paradigm will be, your God will be my God. That's the essence.
And with God comes everything else. That's the whole point. Because guess what? God of Israel has a covenant. God of Israel has a land. God of Israel has laws and rules and regulations and all these kinds of things. He actually has a whole framework. So saying your God will be my God is saying a lot, is what I want you to realize. But we have made it to mean little sometimes, meaning I'm picking your religion. I would like to change my religion today. Please, all right, put the check mark on the application in this spot, and your religion is hence changed. That's not exactly what we're talking about here. So I hope you realize the gravity of her decision. And especially when this is happening, this is even more important because this is not happening at the time when Israel is flourishing. This is happening when Israel is being attacked by every single little tiny group of people out there. Israel is absolutely devastated. They have no strong army. They cannot defend themselves, being completely ravaged by people from every territory, including the Moabites as well. And they're in possession, they're in this economic depression of all sorts, and they're in a religious downside at that moment. And at that moment in history is when she says, your people will be my people, your God will be my God. I mean, I realize things like that have happened in history. This is not a 100% unique situation. Realize that in the fires of the Holocaust, there were plenty of people who were saying, your people will be my people. And they paid for it. But that's what it's like. You know, at the worst point in history, they said, I'm not going to be dissuaded. This is the right thing. And so this is what's happening in Ruth's life.
What I was going to say to this point is like when I preach and evangelize and I talk to, for lack of a better word, Gentile Christians, and I say, you know, and I've used this as an example. I said what Ruth did, in essence, was fall on her sword and she committed ethnic suicide. She totally walked away from, I mean, things like, and I put it in modern day terms, this means for you, really, no more Christmas trees in your house. You know, let's start with that. No more stockings. No more pulled pork barbecue. No more bacon wrapped lobster rolls. I mean, everything you've grown up with an affinity and affection for, and you have soul ties to, gets severed when you really do this to this level. I mean, you're walking away from people who literally, it's a complete break. And yeah, it's not something like a flippant thing you just say with your mouth and you get dunked in water and you go play golf that afternoon.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of
This is a life decision that Ruth is making. Right. So Ruth embraces Israel's God, her people, and land. This is the tripartite commitment that she's making. And I want you to keep this in mind because this actually is important theologically all throughout. She chooses to live among Jews, and she chooses to share their destiny in every way. The blessings and the curses. That's what she takes on by physically being present with the people. She marries into the family of Israel as you keep reading the story, and she's not treated as a foreigner at all. As you read the book of Ruth, you see that she is completely being embraced as this outsider, but yet she's not, because everyone is recognizing that she wants to be part of the family. So Ruth is rewarded for her loyalty to Israel. She is actually deemed righteous in the story, and she relates to God in the context of Israel's covenant. This is important. Because she crosses that threshold, because Israel's God becomes her God and Israel becomes her people, she now relates to God in the context of Israel's covenant. That means these are the measurements by which she's measured. And she is deemed righteous and acceptable and pleasing to God. Obviously, from her destiny, you could see what has become of her. Being married to Boaz and becoming, an ancestor of King David herself. Just imagine what favor the Lord has put in her lap, literally, by giving her that child, Jesse, you know? And so she is operating in the context of Israel's covenant because she walks into that covenant willingly, knowing exactly what it is, and she does it all the way. So, like all other Israelites, she's expected to follow the stipulations and the conditions of the Torah's covenant. She'll be held accountable for it if she doesn't. And that implies her idea of living in the land and now becoming essentially an Israelite in every way possible, though her Moabite heritage is still notwithstanding. Yes?
Are you going to talk about Moabite should enter the congregation of Israel for 10 generations?
Sure.
Okay.
How about that?
You're welcome. No.
See, we think the same way. We know. And I anticipate that I might get asked that question. So here's the verse. This is something that you definitely need to know. It's right there in the Torah in Deuteronomy 23. It says, no Ammonite or Moabite may enter the assembly of the Lord. Even to the 10th generation, none of them may enter the assembly of the Lord forever. Seems very absolute, right? Because they did not meet you with the bread and with water on the way when you came out of Egypt, and because they hired against you Balaam, the son of Beor, from Pethor, Mesopotamia, to curse you. But the Lord your God would not listen to Balaam. Instead, the Lord your God turned the curse into a blessing for you, because the Lord your God loved you. You shall not seek their peace or their prosperity all the days forever. Now, their peace and their prosperity are the Moabites. The people of Moab are not welcome, essentially. This is the welcome mat being rolled up. They're not welcome to the house of the Lord. Guess what? The house of the Lord is a place for open to everyone. Now, when we're talking about Mishkan in the wilderness, yes, children of Israel are right there. Remember how the Mishkan is surrounded by the tents of Israel, right? Israelites surround this. When the temple is being built, now we have such thing as the court of the nations, and that's when the welcome mat gets rolled out, essentially, because now outsiders are welcome. But at that moment in history, in Mishkan, the outsiders were not welcome, because the rules of the community had to be kept, and the holiness, the Kedusha, had to be preserved, because the people are to be holy, and God's presence in their midst is to be unblemished and holy. And so, trust could not be extended to people like Moabites who already failed at that. In fact, tried to undo that in a very grotesque way. So there is no trust. There is no goodwill towards Moabites in this particular scenario when Israel is literally stationed in tents surrounding the tabernacle, the Mishkan, the place of God's presence. So that arrangement, no, they cannot come near. That's prohibited. Later, things change.
Maybe you're going to go where I'm going to go, but or maybe not. As we know, King David came from Ruth, right?
Yeah.
So Ruth is King David's great, or is it great or great grandmother?
Great grandmother. Yeah.
Great. Two greats?
Yes.
Okay. Bottom line, that math does not add up to 10 generations. So we have an interesting problem, right? Because if we take this at face value, or we don't see the nuances of this, King David's illegitimate,
Sure.
right? Unless we understand something, once again putting ourselves in that ancient context, notice Israelites married Moabites, but it was a Moabite woman,
Right.
not a Moabite man marrying a Israelite woman,
Right.
right? So the point is that their offspring are no longer Moabite,
Yeah.
because the tribes come through the male.
You're right. Tribal identity is traced to the male, and that's something that I guess many people have lost sight of. But that is how tribal identity is traced. So yes, being married into that tribe, that's what the children are now. They're not half Moabite, half Israelite. So they've entered into an Israelite, and her proclamation, by the way. And so the rabbis actually deal with this. If you're curious, you can You could pull off Ruth Rabbah, you can pull off Midrash Rabbah, and that's exactly the argument that rabbis are talking about. They're saying, why would David be allowed to store up things to build the holy place for Israel when he is fitting into that genealogy? And then so the answer is that, look, God changes these things sometimes. And obviously, as we read this, again, we have sometimes a very plain, very literal, and a very absolutist reading of these verses. When it says never, it says never. It says forever, it says forever. But please understand, the Torah is not a codex of law. Torah is an instruction. Torah is a teaching. It points us towards the right direction. It gives us guidelines. It is not to be treated like the law of Hammurabi. It's not to be treated like the U.S. criminal law. That's not the point. If we treat the Torah that way, we are completely misusing and abusing it. Because while we have codex of laws and we treat them like lawyers in the courtroom, doing all kinds of things with them, that is not the purpose of Torah. Torah is a teaching, a story. It is an inspirational teaching that's supposed to change us, not make us simply obey and cross, the lines and dot the dots and do all that. That's not what it's about. So while we read these absolute statements, you realize they're not really truly absolute because things change. This is a very similar statement to, you remember how God says that I will bless people who obey me and I will curse people who do not obey me. How many generations? To 1,000 generations, it says, right?
Wow.
But guess what? It only takes one person to turn around and start obeying the Lord for that to change. And this is where you realize, yes, there are some dire consequences and there are some really loud, seemingly all-encompassing pronouncements, but then those pronouncements somehow can be altered and changed with God who's merciful and kind and loving, who deals with us as human beings first and foremost. And even though this rule may be in general applied in most situations, there are probably some situations in which it doesn't apply.
Another angle to look at this would be to say, on the one hand, yes, it's not an absolute statement, but in another sense, it is. It's an absolute complex statement. Like it's not absolute basic arithmetic. This is partial differential equations, right, which you're talking about here. It gets complex.
Yes, it is.
Genealogies are complex.
But thank you for bringing that up, Wendy. I appreciate that. I kind of thought that you might go there. So, not you in particular, but anyone. So we stopped at this idea of Ruth interacting with God of Israel in that covenant relationship. So Ruth takes on a path of full assimilation. That's what we have to understand. She can return home. She can go back to her family, but she does something radical and unexpected. She willingly forsakes her land and her people and her own family. That's a big ask. She stays with Naomi and adopts an Israelite way of life, choosing Israel's God and their customs, which she may still be learning at that point. And she abandons her Moabite affiliations. One of the asks of a convert is to abandon the people that they're associated with. And that's a very difficult ask. And whenever people do talk to me sometimes about conversion, I have to remind them of this is the flip side of the coin. Yes, you are gaining something, but you're also losing something. And is that the step that Hashem really wants you to take? Because this is a big ask. The loyalties, sometimes we find ourselves in this situation of split loyalties. I think many American Jews find themselves right now in a situation of split loyalty. When there's a war going on and people are fighting for their survival, and we realize what side we should stand on, that's very clear and unambiguous, that we should always cast our lot with our people. At the same time, American government says, oh no, ceasefire. Oh, let's do this. Let's negotiate. Let's do this. Let's do that. All of a sudden, the loyalties become split. And the question is, whose loyalty would you rather hold on? Because now we have a conflict of interest. Being and living in this two worlds like that. And it's a difficult ask, like I said. So in Ruth's case, she solved it by declaring her loyalty very clear. So This step that she's taken is very different from merely embracing Israelite beliefs. All her loyalties are towards Israel, despite the tense relations with the Moabites. She turns back on her own people. That's what I want you to realize. On her own family and on her nation, on her gods at large. That is a huge ask. No one in any Christian variety that I know of has been asked to do that, because Christianity is not a national religion. It is a multinational religion. And that's why Christianity should never be equated to Judaism, because we're talking about something completely different. You have a paradigm that is multinational, international, transnational, and it does not require a national loyalty like being part of Judaism does. Here, this type of relationship requires loyalty to the state as well, to the government, to the king, and to the land. Other religions do not necessarily require that. This is a big difference that people don't understand. When they start talking to me sometimes language of conversion, I have to remind them, do you understand what I'm talking about? I'm talking about converting into a people and changing your national identity and turning in your citizenship card of whatever it is that you used to be and getting a new one. Is that what you are opting for? And most people would say, no, not exactly. I just want to join your synagogue. And that's when I tell them, that's really not necessary. If you want to join our synagogue, you don't have to go quite that far. So hopefully you understand the kind of a decision that Ruth is making in her situation. Now, things are simpler with her, right? Because the states are existing in a very basic form, but they are existing. Realize there is a Israel with borders, and there's Moab with their political borders, and there are different languages, and there are different religions, and you got to turn in your voting card in one in order to get the voting card in the other. You're not going to be going back to vote in Moabite elections. That's not going to happen. See what I mean? This is a different kind of a political situation. I realize that we have to jump a few centuries and get our mind to do a little gymnastics to imagine what it was like for her. But this was a big decision. And that's why her story is such an admirable story. That's why her story has become a paradigm, a pattern that ancient rabbis saw and say, this is the kind of a person that we're looking for. If a person comes to us and this is what they have in mind, then they're following that path of Ruth, and that is legitimate, and that loyalty is very clear, and there's no questions asked after that. So hopefully that makes sense. So we already talked about the issue of Moabites and Ammonites. Again, those are the two neighbors that were not favorable to Israel in a very difficult and vulnerable time for Israel. There are some other ites that also have been proclaimed the enemies of God since then, by the way, if you know what I'm talking about. But there's more of them. So because of her absolute commitment, as I said, in rabbinic thought, Ruth is seen as the model and ideal convert. She is turned away, yet she persists. So she has nothing to gain in this relationship with Naomi but her God and her shared destiny. That's really important to ancient rabbis, and they see that. And there's no tangible benefit to Ruth from her relationship. She is sincere. There are special authorities in Israel, and particularly in Orthodox circles, that look down upon conversion for marriage, for example. They would say, oh, you like to convert to get married. And they would say, we won't do that. We want you to convert because you want to convert. We don't want you to convert so you can get married to this person. So there are some people who look down on that. Why? Because you actually have a tangible benefit you're going for, and you actually could be not a sincere convert. You have something to gain. You have a conflict of interest. Are you coming to Israel's God because you want to come to Israel's God? Or are you coming to Israel's God because you want to get married to this person and otherwise you will not? Or that person said no. If not, then no. Other conditions. So there are situations like that. Some rabbis teach that only the converts that convert in the time of Israel's trouble, not prosperity, that are seen as real and true converts. And the faith of others would yet be tried and has to be proven, essentially. So she does that in all the right ways, and that's why I want you to realize that she is seen as that perfect, ideal model of a convert. So, and that's why, by the way, the ancient rabbis adopted this pattern of Naomi's behavior. If you remember, Naomi rebuffed Ruth 3 times, and that is how it's still done today. Discouraging a convert 3 times before even considering someone can become a proselyte. That's how it's been done since I don't know when, but she's definitely the model. So hopefully that makes sense, right? So that was the path of Ruth. Next will be the path of Naaman. I don't know if I want to get into it right now because once I open that can of worms, we might stay there for a while. So what do we say? Wrap it up? Wrap it up. Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, next time we will then go into the story of Naaman the Aramean and see how his path, though similar to Ruth's, because he does embrace the God of Israel wholeheartedly, is in many ways different from her paths. And we will highlight similarities and differences. That's what we want to see. Yet both of them, by the way, beloved by God, clearly, right? They're accepted, both of them, blessed, yet in different ways. So that's what I want you to see. There's not necessarily just one uniform way with God. We can have unity, but it doesn't have to be uniformity. All right?